Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna Robinson, and I am the West Virginia Program Manager and Communications Coordinator for the One America Movement. Thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of Candid Conversations. Candid Conversations is a part of our Corona Rebuild initiative, where we connect the challenges of COVID-19, the divisions in our country, and the roles that we each have to play in order to move forward together. Every Friday, we will feature someone from the One America Movement Network on our show to get candid about how the coronavirus pandemic and the divisions in our country have affected folks in communities across the United States. Excuse me. It's been a long week. We've been covering issues related to race, food insecurity, health disparities, mental health, and the conversation is still very much ongoing. Today, or actually, we started a holiday series. Last week, we had someone come on to discuss Christmas and what it means to them. This week, we are going to be talking about Hanukkah. So joining us today, we have Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin, and she's going to give us the rundown on this Jewish holiday. Some background on Rabbi Rachel. She currently serves as the Rabbinic Fellow. Rabbinic, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
Fellow for the One America Movement, so she is on staff with us. She also teaches at 6th and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C. She also served as the Associate Rabbi for Charlottesville's congregation, Beth Israel, from 2016 to 2020. Welcome, Rabbi Rachel. We're so happy to have you today.
Thanks. It's always nice to see your face.
Oh, thank you.
Waiting for that day. We'll do that in person.
I know.
For now, this is pretty good.
It's been interesting. A lot of our staff members have never met in person. We've only met through video chat. But in some ways, I think it creates a different special type of, I guess, intimacy that maybe we wouldn't have if we were meeting in person every so often. So I'm grateful for it, but it has been interesting, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. But if you're okay with it, I'm ready to just jump right in.
Me too. Let's go for it.
So what is the historical origin of Hanukkah?
Yeah, so there are two stories of Hanukkah, really, or two explanations of Hanukkah. So the first story comes from the book of Maccabees. There's no mention of Hanukkah or any part of this story anywhere in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible. So the historical events upon which Hanukkah is based is from the book of Maccabees, and that's contained in a later collections of writings. And so as the Maccabees, the book of Maccabees tells it, King Antiochus Epiphanes around 168 BCE sent his soldiers to Jerusalem. Once in Jerusalem, these soldiers desecrated the Holy Temple, the holiest place for the Jews. And the king outlawed Judaism and its practices. And there were altars set up to worship Greek gods. And Jews were basically told, convert to Judaism or die. These are your choices. And on the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, which is the Hebrew month we're in right now, the temple was renamed for the Greek god Zeus. And a Jewish resistance movement sprung up. They were called the Maccabees, or sometimes called the Hasmoneans. And they rose up against the king, Judah Maccabee, as the head of the army. And he led this fight. And as the story goes, the Maccabees were greatly outnumbered, but won the war nevertheless. And the word Hanukkah itself means rededication, because this holiday is the commemoration of the Jews rededicating the temple in Jerusalem. I want to raise an interesting part of the Hanukkah story that is the part we don't always tell. And that is that this story is also a story of Jewish infighting. That partly what happened in this time is that there were Jews who very much wanted to assimilate into the Greek culture around them. And then there were other Jews who saw themselves as pious and committed to a certain way of Jewish practice. And they did not like the assimilation that was happening amongst their fellow Jews. And so in part, this is a civil war between the pious Jews, the zealot Jews, and the Jews who wanted to assimilate and become part of the Greek culture around them. And so I think particularly for One America and the work that we do, this element of the story is not the one we tell the 10-year-olds at Sunday school, but it's an important one because it's really a warning for us about what can happen if any one of us is too zealous about our own beliefs or ways of life, if we stand so firmly in our own camp that we stop trying to understand one another and decide it's my way or the highway. We see very clearly in the story that leads to violence. And it does in the time of the Maccabees. Should I keep going with like the other story, or do you have follow-up questions for me on that? I know that was a lot.
No. You can keep going. I do have some things I want to ask, but you can keep going and I'll ask them when you're finished.
Great. Okay. So the other explanation of this story is the one that you may be more familiar with. And this is the story of the oil. So hundreds of years after the Maccabean revolt occurred, the rabbis wrote about this Hanukkah tale in the Talmud. So for just a second, I want you to imagine that your cell phone battery has 10% left on it, and it lasts you for 8 days without having to be plugged in and charged. Now you understand the Talmudic version of this story.
Okay.
So according to the Talmud, the major work of rabbinic Judaism, when the Maccabees began to take the temple back from the Greeks, they lit the Ner Tamid, which means the eternal light that burned constantly in the temple. And they found one single jar of oil in the temple, which should have only been enough to last for 1 day. And the messenger who was sent out to find more oil took 8 days to return with this oil. And that initial amount of oil lasted for a full 8 days. And then the rabbis attributed the 8 days of Hanukkah to this miraculous lasting of the oil.
Wow. Okay. So there are many different stories that kind of go into I guess,
or different pieces of a story.
Right, that go into the creation of or the history of Hanukkah. That's so interesting. And I actually really love the fact that Hanukkah started kind of like a social justice movement almost, way back in the day.
In a way, you could look at it like that. You could look at it as a movement of like religious freedom and standing up against oppressors. You could also look at it as like religious extremists, in fact.
That's true.
Trying to force their very stringent way of practice onto all of the other Jews.
Right.
So there really are two readings. It doesn't mean that Hanukkah doesn't have these beautiful meanings, which we can talk about later, in this conversation.
Yeah.
I think, there are like some true elements of the story that aren't so pretty too.
Right. And I think it's important that we do acknowledge those things too. But just because I'm going to go with the social justice side of the story.
Let's do it.
Just for argument's sake. A couple weeks ago, we had a conversation where you revealed to me that Hanukkah is actually not a major Jewish holiday, which was like, oh my gosh, what? And a lot of people believe that Hanukkah is similar to Christmas in the Christian tradition. Can you explain Hanukkah's significance?
Yeah, so religiously speaking, it is true that Hanukkah is not the most or even one of the most significant holidays. As I said before, it's not in the Jewish Bible. And in addition to that, it doesn't have the numerous prescribed rituals that a lot of our other holidays have, or the restrictions around certain activities that a lot of our holidays have. So for example, work is forbidden on Shabbat, work is forbidden on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, on some of these other holidays, which we can talk about later. Hanukkah doesn't have any of those restrictions. You go about your normal daily life in Hanukkah. You go to work, and the only major practice that's required of you is to light the Hanukkah menorah, the Chanukiah, each evening.
The Hanukkah?
Yeah, the Chanukiah is the particular menorah used for Hanukkah. And, it's not to say that that Hanukkah is not important to Jews. And I think I was looking at something earlier that might have said like 72% of Jews celebrate Hanukkah, which is a lot of Jews. And I think it has become a really important holiday in contemporary times, but in part that is because of its proximity to Christmas, right? So for example, like the ritual of gift giving is not a religious ritual of Hanukkah. And it's sort of ironic to think that one reading of the Hanukkah story was an uprising against assimilation.
Right.
Was a story and a moment of saying, like, we are proud Jews and we won't allow ourselves to fully assimilate. We will keep our practices. It's funny now that one of the major contemporary practices of Hanukkah, at least in the United States and other westernized countries, is a ritual that only takes place because of how much we've assimilated and because there's Christmas presents every year.
Right. I was actually going to ask what your thoughts were on how, like, why in mainstream media has Hanukkah become like almost like the Jewish Christmas, especially given that that it's not one of the most significant holidays. So I can see that. I can see how, it's become this holiday that people view as like the Jewish Christmas because it is close to Christmas. But
it comes from a good place, right? I mean, in some ways, by raising its importance, it gives us something to, like, we get to share something with our neighbors. They're celebrating and having this beautiful time together, and so are we. And, in the best case scenario, they can tell us about Christmas and we can tell them about Hanukkah. And then the downside of that is that sometimes Jews feel really left out at this time of year. And it can be frustrating. You walk into the grocery store and everyone says Merry Christmas and you're like, hey, what about me?
Right.
I'm wearing a Hanukkah sweatshirt, right? So
which I love, by the way.
Thank you. I love it too.
I think it's really great. But if Hanukkah is not the most significant of the Jewish holidays, like many people believe, what are the major holidays in Judaism?
So Judaism has a lot of holidays. It's actually one of my favorite things about Judaism. It's like every couple months, there's a really good excuse to be together as a family and really take time celebrating something or observing something. Shabbat is actually like the most important Jewish practice. It comes every week. Mm-hmm. And in addition to Shabbat, right? Obviously, Shabbat is like Sabbath. That's every single week, Friday evening to Saturday evening. Right. But some of the other biggies, we'll say, are the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, which usually falls in September, October, as well as Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish Day of Atonement. It's a very serious day of introspection and self-reflection and thinking about how we have hurt others around us in that year, thinking about how we may have like hurt the world or our planet. And it is actually a 25-hour fast day of like real serious repentance.
I'm sorry to cut you off. So how does it work? So you fast, and do you go, like, I guess, are you celebrating, or can you?
Yeah. So interestingly, Yom Kippur is not as much of a celebration, I would say, as like the Jewish New Year, which involves like a big family meal and going to worship services and eating apples and honey, which is like a traditional food to eat. Yom Kippur, for many Jews, especially in a time where there is not COVID, looks like a very large meal together the evening that it starts, really to fill up before this fast. And then a lot of people spend the entire next day in synagogue, worshiping, studying, reflecting, all the way until the sun sets, where they have a big meal to break the fast.
Okay, so it's a day of like reflection then.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then I think in the spring we have Passover or Pesach, and that is the holiday in which Jews celebrate having been freed from slavery in Egypt, crossing the sea. And that holiday, involves a Seder, depending on where you are, sometimes 2 Seders, these really big meals with rituals and specific foods. And you don't eat anything with leaven in it for the entire holiday. So like people clean out their entire houses. breadcrumbs and anything that isn't kosher for Passover for that holiday. And they totally change over their pantries and their refrigerators. People don't go to work the first day or two, and at the end as well. I could go on and on with like other important ones, but Hanukkah still falls below all of these.
Right. Which is still mind-blowing to me. And I know it was mind-blowing to a lot of people. Like after we had that discussion, I was like, oh my gosh, did you know that Hanukkah is like, it's not like that. It's not how we believe it to be, but I'm really, can you explain really quick before we move on? Because you mentioned the Seder. Can you explain what a Seder is for those who are watching who may not know?
Yeah, so a Seder is like this acting out of the Passover story in a sense. It's like a meal in which you retell the story of leaving Egypt during the meal with like specific foods on a Seder plate that represent different parts of that story. And really it probably looks different in every single Jewish person's home. From like what Haggadah, what prayer book, so to speak, what Seder prayer book is one family using. It's different usually from another family's. And also the recipes are different from family to family.
Right. Do you think that the traditions of Hanukkah differ from family to family? How did your family celebrate Hanukkah when you were growing up?
Yeah, so Hanukkah was always this really fun and happy time of year. We definitely lit the Chanukiah, the menorah for Hanukkah together every night. Presents were a big deal. I have this funny memory. I must have been like 5 or 6. I don't know if anyone watching this remembers, like there were these stuffed animals that had baby stuffed animals that like were in the belly of the stuffed animal with like a Velcro. Do you remember these? No. Anyway, I'll put in this story, but I wanted this pink pony so badly that has the Velcro that opens with the baby ponies on the inside. Anyway, I remember the year that like I got that pony and I was very excited. And I think also my synagogue always had a big night where there was like a Hanukkah meal and we celebrated together. And so, going to temple, going to synagogue during Hanukkah was definitely also a part of the experience for me growing up.
Very cool. Very cool. So you now have your own family. You have a young son and you do have a dog. I know he might not be included in these celebrations, but how do you plan to celebrate Hanukkah as your son grows older?
That's a really fun question. It's funny right now because my son is 18 months. He has no idea. He doesn't know what Hanukkah is. We did put our Chanukiah in the window and he kind of keeps saying, "What's that? What's that?" And I tell him Chanukiah, but he doesn't quite understand it. I think what I hope it will be once he really starts to understand, I hope that like those 8 days will be like a night where our family spends time together each of those evenings where we say the blessings and we light the candles. And I'm sure like he's a child growing up in America. Like I'm sure presents will also be part of it for him too, as it was for me. But I also hope that we'll find ways to bring the practice of giving tzedakah, of like giving to those in need, into Hanukkah as well. So I have a very good friend. I won't name her on here. She's a rabbi, and her children are teenagers now. But she has a practice with her family where one night of Hanukkah every year is the night of giving to others. And so she and her husband give their kids a certain amount of money. And instead of them receiving presents that night, they light the candles and they sit down together and they talk about where they want to donate this money. What are the options for causes? And so I think that's a really important thing for children is to, sure, give them gifts and give them presents and let them have fun. But for me, it will also be important that my child recognizes how fortunate we are and how much we do have, and that it's not all about receiving, that we also need to give.
I really like that. I really do like that because I feel like a lot of holidays have become about just, what am I going to get? What am I going to get? And I think teaching children when they're young that it is important to give back to people and not just receive is super important. So I really like that tradition that your friend has started. And I'm excited to see how you celebrate Hanukkah with your son as he grows older. I think that's an amazing thing. And it's so great to watch babies, learn about holidays and what they mean and ask questions. So I'm excited for you because I know that this is kind of, well, not kind of, it is new. And you're learning as you go. So I'm excited to see how you guys continue with that.
Thanks. Me too.
No problem. So when we had our discussion before, you told me about a debate from the Talmud about how one should light the Hanukkah. Can you please share that story with us? I thought it was super interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a debate in the Talmud between two rabbis, and there are lots of debates in the Talmud. And interestingly, in the Talmud, which is this major work of rabbinic literature, really kind of like the commentary on the commentary. I won't go into all of that, but there are often debates, and there are often opinions that are minority opinions are kept in the canon, right? Or kept in the writing, even though they're not the opinion that like wins the day, so to speak. So there's this value in this argument and in reading these different perspectives and maintaining minority positions and majority positions. So with all of that said, there's this debate about the Hanukkah. Should you start on the first night of Hanukkah, should you start with 8 lit candles or 8 lit flames, and each night take one of the flames away, right, to eventually get down to only 1 candle burning on the last night of Hanukkah? Or should you start out on the first night with 1 candle, second night with 2 candles, and so on, all the way until the last night where you have 8 candles burning? And the opinion that wins and that we follow today is that you should start out with only 1 flame and increase to 8 flames. And there's this beautiful idea behind that we always want to be increasing light in the world, not taking light away. And so, I like to think about that during Hanukkah, like how am I bringing light into the world, and how am I increasing light in the world right now during this time of Hanukkah, but also, throughout the year.
And I really love that. I really love the idea of lighting more candles each day throughout Hanukkah to show increasing light in the world, increasing positivity. With everything going on today with our politics in the United States, social isolation, and COVID, everything else that's happening, what is your vision for the future? How do you think we can increase light in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big question. What is my vision for the future? I think I've been thinking a lot recently about how much work there is to do, and how much needs to be done, like everywhere. And I think like if you think about these like little tiny flames of light, it's, they're small, and they don't like light up the whole room, and they don't last, for that long. But each tiny flame, like by the time that you get to the 8th night, like it's really, really beautiful. And each one together adds up into this really, really, I mean, just really beautiful if you've never seen a Hanukkah lit on the 8th night. And so I just think like every small act that we take in the direction of bettering the world really matters. If you help one family or one person, you are bringing light. Even if it's just a little bit of light, you're bringing light. And I think, like with One America right now, I've been helping to facilitate and run one of our chapters. And it's a really small group of people getting together who have very different views on religion and on the world. And, I think someone could look at that and say, wow, that's a lot of hours and energy spent with just, 8 people. Aren't there so many people who need to come together? But I think that like just those 8 people together could lead to so much light later. So even though it's just little small flames, this one little group bringing light into the world, that has a ripple effect, and that can light up the world in other places. So I think like as we feel overwhelmed, start small. We don't have to start huge. We can start small.
I love that. And I 100% agree that, when we're doing things, I think a lot of people tend to think that what I'm doing is small. I'm not really making a difference. I'm only one person. But the truth is, you as one person, you can affect 5 people around you, and those 5 people will then go and spread that light to 10 more people. So I think it's good to look at things like that. We are just one. I'm one person, you're one person, but we can make a difference. And I think that you are making a difference in all of the work that you do. And I told you before, and I will tell you again, you inspire me. I'm very proud to call you a coworker and a friend, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to meet you and have this conversation with you. So
I feel the same about you too, just so you know. So
thank you. We are running out of time though. We want to make sure that I respect your time. So I want to thank you again for joining us and chatting with us today. We have shared some resources that Rabbi Rachel provided for us in the comments. So if you want to read more about Hanukkah after watching this conversation, please feel free to check out those links. Before we head out, I want to remind you to check out our website, www.oneamericamovement.org. You can also find us on Facebook at One America Movement and Twitter at One America MVMT. And those here's the Twitter. Here is our Facebook.
And if you want to learn about any of the other holidays I talked about, the website that I have provided of reformjudaism.org or BIMBAM, BIMBAM, those are really good places to find information about other Jewish holidays too, if you want to do more learning.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. You guys, thank you again for tuning in today to watch our Hanukkah conversation. Make sure you tune in next week for our third and final episode in our holiday series. We have our CEO coming on, Andrew Hanauer, to talk about the new year and his hopes for the future. So make sure you tune in. Thank you guys so much again for watching. Have a wonderful weekend. See you next week.